Welcome to today's lesson on understanding the order within a food chain, an essential concept in ecology that reveals the structure and dynamics of ecosystems. In our lesson today, we will explore the specific roles of producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers within a food chain. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to not only identify these different groups, but also understand their interdependent relationships in sustaining the ecosystem. So far, you have learned about the concept of interdependence in ecology, which highlights how various organisms rely on each other for survival. This foundational knowledge sets the stage for us to delve deeper into how energy flows through different levels of a food chain, starting from the producers and moving up to the tertiary consumers. Let's get started. A food chain illustrates the hierarchy and flow of energy in an ecosystem, showing who eats whom. It always starts with a producer and progresses through various levels of consumers. Each level in a food chain is called a trophic level. Let's discuss each level in more detail. Let's start by looking at the foundation of the chain, producers. Producers form the first trophic level and are crucial as they generate the energy that sustains the rest of the food chain. Typically, these are green plants or algae, which use sunlight to perform photosynthesis. In some harsh environments, certain bacteria called chemoautotrophs can produce food using inorganic chemicals instead of sunlight. Producers carry out photosynthesis. In other words, they convert sunlight into glucose, a form of energy stored in their biomass. This stored energy is passed on to the next level when they are consumed. Next is primary consumers. Primary consumers are the second trophic level. They directly eat producers and are usually herbivores, plant eaters. When primary consumers eat producers, they use the energy stored in the producer's biomass for their own growth and reproduction. Let's now look at the role of secondary consumers. These organisms make up the third trophic level. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers and can be either carnivores, meat eaters, or omnivores, eaters of both plants and animals. Secondary consumers gain energy by consuming the biomass of primary consumers. This biomaterial provides the necessary nutrients and energy for their survival. The fourth trophic level consists of tertiary consumers, which include top predators in an ecosystem. They feed on secondary consumers and can be either large carnivores or omnivores. As tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers, they harness the energy stored within their prey's biomass. This level is often smaller because energy diminishes as it moves up the food chain. Decomposers, like bacteria and fungi, play a vital role in an ecosystem by breaking down dead plant and animal material. They secrete enzymes to decompose these materials into small, soluble molecules, which can then be absorbed by the decomposers. This process recycles nutrients back into the environment, enriching soil and supporting plant growth. By doing so, decomposers help to keep ecosystems sustainable by ensuring that essential nutrients are returned to the soil, making them available for producers to use through photosynthesis once again. Understanding how energy flows through these levels is key to grasping the dynamics of ecosystems. With each step up the food chain, the amount of obtainable energy decreases. This is because energy is lost to the environment as heat during metabolic processes. Generally, only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level is passed to the next. Therefore, there are fewer organisms and less energy available at higher trophic levels. It's also important to mention that in reality, a single food chain is not isolated, but part of a larger, more complex system known as a food web. In a food web, organisms can occupy multiple trophic levels. For instance, an omnivore like a bear might eat both plants and animals, making it both a primary consumer and a secondary or tertiary consumer, depending on what it eats. Understanding trophic levels and how they fit into food webs helps illustrate the flow of energy through an ecosystem and highlights the interconnectedness of organisms. In a balanced ecosystem, predator and prey populations interact dynamically. Predators keep the population of their prey in check, preventing overgrazing or depletion of producers. If the prey population increases, the predator population will also increase due to more food availability. However, as predators consume more prey, the prey population decreases, eventually leading to a decline in predator numbers too. This cycle continues and maintains equilibrium in the ecosystem. Let's work through a question to consolidate our knowledge on the order within a food chain. If all frogs were removed from the food chain, what would happen to the grasshopper population? The food chain starts with plants, eaten by grasshoppers, eaten by frogs, which are eaten by hawks. Pause here to have a go. Now let's go through it. Frogs eat grasshoppers, secondary consumers eating primary consumers. Without frogs, the grasshopper population would likely increase because they have fewer predators. The increased grasshopper population might overconsume plants, producers, reducing available plant biomass. The hawks, tertiary consumers, might struggle for food due to fewer frogs. In today's lesson, we explored the structure of food chains in ecosystems, focusing on producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. We defined producers, like plants and algae, as organisms that create their own food through photosynthesis, forming the base of the food chain. We then examined primary consumers, herbivores like insects and rabbits, that feed on producers, followed by secondary consumers, carnivores like frogs and snakes, that prey on primary consumers. We discussed tertiary consumers, the top predators, such as hawks and sharks, that eat secondary consumers. Finally, we discussed decomposers, that break down dead animal and plant material, recycling nutrients back into the environment. We also covered energy transfer within food chains, noting that energy decreases at each trophic level. We understood that organisms are often part of more complex food webs of interconnected species that can exist at multiple different trophic levels. Finally, we covered predator-prey dynamics. In a balanced ecosystem, predator and prey populations regulate each other through a dynamic cycle where predators control prey numbers, which in turn influences predator populations, maintaining ecological equilibrium. This understanding of food chain dynamics helps clarify how energy flows through ecosystems and the interdependence of species, providing a foundation for studying more complex ecological interactions.